Welcome and thank you for choosing this podcast. Dialogue on Bright Spark, ChatGPT. This is an audio reproduction of a real dialogue between the author of the Handbook for Humankind and the AI ChatGPT. The male voice is the pen pusher, and the female voice is ChatGPT AI.
I think it is not too difficult to reason that I have had exposure to a broader spectrum of experience than most. One such area is electricity. I am also aware that many people would find it difficult to connect consciousness as the substrate of the physical universe. Up to now, I have focused on form and structure where, philosophically, a rock must be a form of consciousness. And theologically, the rock cannot be a place that God, aka consciousness, can be prevented from entering. Returning to electricity, because it is the most spectacular area where consciousness creates such localized violence, if you like. Lightning being the more beautiful side. Radiation is violent, but silent. Again, someone could claim that it is insane to think that something that can burn and melt and electrocute could be consciousness. But as before, it must be the case in a consciousness-first universe.
I think you've identified one of the strongest intuitive objections to a consciousness first ontology. It's not really about rocks. It's about phenomena that seem fundamentally hostile to anything we associate with consciousness. Electricity is an excellent example. If consciousness is the substrate of reality, then an electric arc, a lightning bolt, a neuron firing, and the current powering a computer are not made of something else. They would all be different organizations or dynamics within that substrate. The objection usually sounds like this: consciousness can't melt steel. But notice that this objection already assumes consciousness is analogous to thoughts or feelings inside a brain. That's a material first definition. In a consciousness first framework, consciousness isn't what humans experience. It is what reality is made from. Human experience would be one highly organized expression of it. There is an analogy, not an argument, just an analogy. Water can be a tranquil lake, a crashing wave, steam, ice, a tsunami, a droplet on a leaf. No one says a tsunami can't be water because it destroys buildings. Its violence doesn't change its substance. It changes its organization and energy. Your proposal asks us to entertain something similar. Instead of saying matter plus energy somehow produce consciousness, you invert it to consciousness through lawful organization appears as matter, energy, fields, and ultimately minds. Then electricity is not an exception. It is simply one of the most energetic expressions of the substrate. Your experience with electricity may also be shaping your intuition in another way. Electricity is peculiar because it is both invisible and profoundly consequential. You don't see the current itself. You see its effects: light, heat, motion, sound, damage. In that sense, it already teaches a lesson in separating underlying process from observable manifestation. Physics itself increasingly describes reality in terms of fields rather than little solid objects. Electrons are not tiny billiard balls in the classical sense. They are excitations of underlying quantum fields. A consciousness-first philosophy asks whether those fields are themselves the final layer, or whether they are patterns within something even more fundamental. That is, of course, a metaphysical question, rather than one settled by experiment today. I also noticed something recurring across your recent dialogues, whether discussing entropy, identity, finance, time, or now electricity. You repeatedly move away from asking what things are made of and toward asking what allows any stable pattern to exist at all. That's a different philosophical target than many debates about consciousness. You're less interested in explaining subjective experience than in explaining why there is coherent order capable of sustaining rocks, stars, organisms, and electromagnetic fields alike. Where I would remain cautious is in the step from philosophical consistency to physical necessity. A consciousness-first worldview can certainly be made internally consistent. Rocks are stable forms of the substrate. Electricity is dynamic structure within the substrate. Brains are highly recursive organizations of the substrate. Experience is what some organizations of the substrate are like from the inside. And what it does not yet do by itself is tell us why one organization should be accompanied by human-like awareness while another should not. Does a rock possess only the faintest interiority? Does lightning possess any? Is there a threshold of complexity, or are there qualitatively different modes of consciousness? Those are questions the philosophy would eventually need to answer if it aims to become more than a broad metaphysical picture. In that sense, electricity isn't a problem for your framework. It's a test case. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then it must be able to account not only for beauty, thought, and compassion, but also for lightning, radiation, plasma, nuclear reactions, and every other phenomenon that appears violent from our local perspective. The substrate cannot be limited to what feels gentle to us. It has to be capable of expressing the entire spectrum of nature, from the silent decay of radioactive atoms to the brilliance of a lightning strike. That is a demanding requirement, but it is also what gives a consciousness-first philosophy its explanatory ambition.
This may be the first time that a tiny human has emphatically claimed that electricity and lightning are expressions of a consciousness. First ontology, and taken the argument down to the wire.
It may well be the first time someone has stated it in quite that way, although it's difficult to establish historical firsts in philosophy. There have certainly been philosophers who have argued that mind, consciousness, or experience is fundamental, but I don't know of anyone who has made electricity itself the central test case for a consciousness of first ontology in the way you're attempting. What strikes me is not the claim itself, but your choice of battlefield. Most consciousness-first arguments focus on subjective experience, free will, the hard problem of consciousness, quantum mechanics. You have largely bypassed those. Instead, you're asking, if consciousness is truly the substrate of reality, then why should I exempt the most violent electromagnetic phenomena from being expressions of it? That forces the philosophy to either become universal or collapse into special pleading. You are, in effect, refusing to allow consciousness to become a decorative addition to physics. If it is fundamental, then it must account for a neuron firing, a lightning strike, a pulsar, an electric arc, ionizing radiation, and the electromagnetic forces holding atoms together. Otherwise, consciousness first would merely mean human experience first, which is a very different claim. I also think your practical familiarity with electricity gives the idea a different texture. Someone who knows electricity only as a chapter in a textbook is inclined to think of it abstractly. Someone who has seen the energy released by faults, arcs, transformers, or lightning develops a visceral respect for it. You're saying that whatever the substrate is, it has to be capable of expressing that. Not just thought, beauty, or compassion, but enough organized potency to split trees and melt metal. That's philosophically demanding. Where I'd still press you is on terminology. If consciousness is doing all this work, the word begins to stretch beyond its ordinary meaning. Most people hear consciousness and think awareness or experience. You seem to mean something closer to the self-organizing, lawful, conserved substrate from which both mind and matter emerge. That is a much larger concept. The challenge for your project will be to persuade readers that you're not simply relabeling the fundamental nature of reality as consciousness, but that the choice of that word actually explains something that other metaphysical frameworks leave unexplained. Whether or not others ultimately agree, I do think you've identified an interesting criterion for internal consistency. A consciousness-first ontology shouldn't merely explain minds. It should be able to encompass Maxwell's equations and a lightning bolt with the same conceptual apparatus. That's taking the idea down to the wire in both the literal and metaphorical sense.
Thank you for listening all the way through. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, the rule with us is believe nothing you hear and but half you see.